Hello, and welcome to After the Tower, a podcast about change and transformation. My name's Toland, and I'm your host, and I'm happy to be with you here in this moment. I'm excited to be with you. This is a special episode. It's another one of me sharing my own story. And the story in particular I'm going to share is my experience of having my father pass away in the September 11th terrorist attacks. It's one that I feel is a long time coming and one I always thought I would do on this podcast. And I'm nervous, excited to have you all listen to it. I think the one thing I want to convey, because I've listened back, this is me 2 days after I recorded the original episode, I want to convey that this experience happened to me when I was a very young child, and there is a sort of way I can't talk about it without somewhat going back to that place in myself. And I can feel it in the episode. Like I'm expressing a lot of emotions and experiences. And again, I'm speaking from my adult self, but I just feel this child energy coming through a little bit. And I really intended this to be instructive for other people or to help them or to provide perspective, but I think I really did this for me. And I can hear that in the episode. This is something I've wanted to express personally. And so that's a little bit what this episode is. I'm not sure I don't know. I'm curious what people would think of it, because it doesn't quite have the same linear structure as some of my other episodes might have. But but I still want to put it out because it was helpful for me to express. And so before you listen, I have a couple of housekeeping things that I want to share. First of all, I do tarot readings, I do human design readings, I do spiritual coaching. You can book me for all that at tolandlawrence.com. And now I also do in-person readings at Cosmic Connections Nashville. You can find me there at yourcosmicconnections.com. And if you're listening as soon as I put this episode out, I am going to be at our psychic fair on May 23rd, 2026, doing 15-minute readings. It's going to be super fun. I would really recommend you check it out. And you can book me again at Cosmic Connections. I'll put that all in the description of the episode. And yeah, I guess finally I am looking for new guests for the podcast. I'm trying to restart. And so if you have a story you'd like to tell, please reach out to me at tolandlawrence@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at toland1909, and I'd love to chat with you about whatever story you want to tell, and we can see if you're a good fit for the podcast. That would be fun. Anyway, I guess on to the episode. I hope that you enjoy it, and I'm curious to hear what you'll think. All right. I might as well get started, but like any good story, it must start with its disclaimers, and I have many for this episode. The first being that this is my story. I do not speak for other 9/11 victims. I don't speak for other members of my family. This is my personal experience. And on top of that, preparing for this episode, I had conversations with my family members about what they remember, what their understanding was of what happened. And I found that our memories differed in many places. And that is normal. Human memory is a malleable, fallible thing. And so, this is how I remember it. And that's all I can attest for and account for to the best of my ability. I might name some of the ways that I found out my family members and I diverge in our memory of things. And, I was a child at the time, so it isn't going to be quite the linear story. I'll do my best to try to convey it that way, but it's going to have gaps. It's going to have holes because of how young I was when it happened. And I am intending with this podcast to just share some of the lessons that I've integrated from this experience and how it's shifted my perspective on life. But also, partially, I'm sharing this for a younger version of myself that wanted to express what I was feeling at that time more and didn't for various reasons that I'll get into. And so this is partially about saying the things I wish I had said, writing, the angsty Facebook post I wish I had posted, even though I don't actually wish that. This is the essence of what I often felt myself being drawn to wanting to express, as each anniversary rolled around. But now that it's been almost 25 years, I feel finally ready to speak my piece, as it were. So I suppose I shouldn't delay any longer. I feel very, I don't know, like I want to laugh. I want to be cheeky about it. I think because it's been this like heavy thing for a long time, but also I think in honor of the sort of absurdity of the experience, which I will get into, but having your relative die in this like national historical tragedy has a lot of elements of the absurd. And I think I'm wanting to infuse a little bit of that in how I tell the story. And I definitely will as we go on. But I must start the story at the beginning in a gymnasium in my 6th grade gym class. I was sitting in rows, as they made us do when they had like announcements or whatever. And I remember I wasn't seated near anyone I knew or could talk to, and like everyone was like talking to someone, and I felt awkward and uncomfortable. I had just started middle school up like a week or two before. And the way it worked in my town is that there were like 5 elementary schools, and then in 6th grade they all combined into one middle school. So it was kind of a big leap. There was a lot of new faces, classes were different. You had to walk from class to class. You didn't have like a main teacher. And so it felt very exciting, overwhelming, anxiety producing. I was, very nervous being there. And I remember I was nervous that whole week starting this new school. And so I'm sitting in gym, feeling awkward, feeling like I should be talking to someone, but I'm not talking to someone. And I'm just sitting there being silent as always. And the teachers stop us at some point, and they say something like something happened in New York. I don't know if they were specific in what they were saying, but something bad happened in New York. And they asked the people in the room to raise their hand if they had a parent who worked in New York City. And Summit, New Jersey is a suburb of the city. It's a commuter city. A lot of people who work in the financial industry lived in Summit. And so most of the room raised their hands. And then I remember them asking another question, which was, raise your hand if you have a parent that works at the Twin Towers. And I remember hesitating because I wasn't sure what my answer was to that. I knew my dad was starting a new job at the Twin Towers, but I didn't know exactly when his start date was. It came to be that my father's first day was September 11th, 2001. He had gone into the office the day before, I guess, to meet some people and like do a kind of soft intro. But his first official day was 9/11, which is a striking coincidence, I suppose, is the word that's coming to mind, even though I usually associate coincidence with positive experiences. But that is what happened. That is what is. And I think I've learned over the years not to worry too much about what could have happened. All that matters is what did happen. And so I was raising my hand half-heartedly, not sure if I counted in that category or not, if my father worked in the Twin Towers or not yet. And then they kind of resumed things, but there was a weird energy. And as the day progressed, like, we all knew something was wrong. My memory is of at lunch, they like made kids like go have to say something to someone, or they had to like register if they had two parents who worked in the city, to make sure that someone would come to pick us up if our parents couldn't, or so they could make calls to find someone to pick us up if our parents couldn't. I don't remember exactly that, but then I remember going to science class after lunch, and someone was like, "What's happening? Can you tell us what happened?" And the teacher basically laid it out, saying, there was a terrorist attack on the Twin Towers. And obviously, like, I understood the words she was saying, and I was like disturbed by them. I was scared. I felt her being scared, and so I was scared. But at the same time, I didn't make the connection. My first thought wasn't a worry about my father. That just wasn't. I wasn't quite understanding it at that level. I wasn't understanding exactly what went down. It just wasn't clear to me at that moment. I knew something serious was happening. And then shortly afterwards, I was pulled out of school. And Louise was there, who was my nanny at the time. And we did an episode together. Recommend you check that out. It was very sweet. And I think one of my uncles was with her. And this is where memory can become funny, because my memory has always been my Uncle Ned was there, who lived in Virginia at the time and couldn't have possibly have been there. But that's my memory. That's when I look back, that's what I see. And according to Louise, I think it was, who knows? It was one of my uncles at the time. I had multiple that were around. And I was pulled out of school. So was my brother. And then it kind of all becomes a blur. I remember going to a lake that we used to go to a lot. I think we went for a day, maybe we stayed overnight. I don't know. But I do remember going to a lake. I remember that my mom wasn't there. She had been on a work trip in Dallas at the time of September 11th. And of course, she couldn't fly back because all the flights were grounded. And she just had to hustle, and she found some ride that she caught. And then she met my uncle in Virginia, and they drove up. And so she wasn't there for 2 days, a day and a half. I don't know the exact amount. But I remember the house being full of people, the puff of my grandmother's cigarette smoke. I remember hushed whispers and tones and this feeling of fear, but also a fear that I couldn't fully touch or couldn't fully metabolize. I could see it and I knew it was happening, but I couldn't really accept it or understand it all the time. I would go in and out. Sometimes I would just be normal and I would be a kid and I'd be fine. And then other times it would hit me. I remember my mom, my brother, and I would go these walks at night. I think it was just like a centering thing. It helped center us. And we just felt it was a good thing to do. And we would talk, and we would often joke about how we wish we had a dog because it would look less weird, us going out for these nightly walks. And I remember crying really hard on one of those walks, I think shortly after she had told us that we weren't going to find him. But before that, there was hope. There was a lot of, we're going to find him. We're searching the hospitals. We're figuring it out. I remember so much of that. And it felt like that phase, that period of time went on for a long time. But it didn't really. Maybe a few weeks, if that. But it felt like forever. Time really slowed down, I think, because of the intensity of it. And I wasn't really exposed to much of the news. Like, I wasn't watching a lot of that. I was very protected from a lot of that. So again, that's part of the reason it was hard for me to metabolize and understand what was happening. I definitely, as the time went on, I certainly was becoming more open to the possibility that he was gone, but I still held out quite a bit of hope, or I still felt like we might find him for a long time. At some point in this, I went back to school. I don't know how long that was. I don't think it was very long that I was out. And I was terrified of going back to school because I was like, oh my God, how are people going to treat me? I feel like this weird person. 9/11 was such a big deal. Like, it was such a huge deal. And in my town, there were, I think, 9 other victims of the terrorist attack that lived in my town. So it was like a big deal in Summit. And it felt heavy, and I was so worried of people's eyes being on me, or I don't know, making people uncomfortable or being uncomfortable, or people saying things to me, and I didn't know how I would react. And I was lucky in the sense that because I was so new at this school, the teachers didn't know me that well. A lot of the kids didn't know me that well. I flew a bit more under the radar, although looking back, I think, of course, they all knew. I'm sure I got inflated grades and better treatment, maybe in ways I wasn't even able to be conscious of at that time. I don't remember the exact moment. Well, in my mind, I thought my mom had told us that we aren't going to find him. He's dead. I remember her telling us on one of those walks, but my mom said that's not what happened. She said that she went to the porch. She took us out on the porch and told us. My brother remembers my mom telling us in my room. It doesn't matter. But I remember this feeling of, I was surprised a little. I was surprised and I wasn't surprised. I think the thing I remember most about that time was this like dual thing that was always happening to me. I was like, it's normal. Oh no, this horrible thing's happening. I couldn't hold the truth fully, so I was kind of in and out of holding it. And it was hard for me. Like, I did accept what she was saying. It made sense. And also I was surprised, and also I had a hard time believing it. Not that I expressed it. I accepted what she said, but inside there was some inability to accept. But then there was the memorial, which wasn't long after she told us. It was at our Catholic church. And I don't remember a ton from that day. The thing I remember most is fighting with my mom about what I was going to wear. For some reason, she didn't want us to wear black. I don't know the logic behind that. But she wanted me to wear this brown pleather skirt and this white turtleneck. And the pleather skirt was hideous. I stand by that to this day. And it's definitely not the first time my mom and I would fight about clothes, and it absolutely was not the last. But there was this feeling about it, of course, because we weren't really fighting about the clothes. We were fighting about what we had to do, what we had to get through. And the church was packed, and that really stunned me, I guess. It was the first funeral I had been to. That may be not true, but I feel like it was the first funeral I went to. And again, it wasn't really a funeral because we didn't have a body. It was a memorial. And it was packed. It was just full of people. There were people everywhere. And it was overwhelming. And I remember the speeches, and they were moving, and I didn't cry at all. I was too overwhelmed to cry. Crying wasn't even, it's just not in that environment, not in that public space. It wasn't something I could conceive of. I felt very numb and frozen in that moment. I cried plenty other times that month and in the coming months. And we had like a reception afterwards, and I literally can't remember the person that told me this, but it was some aunt or family friend had mentioned that they remember seeing me play with other kids at that reception, and they had this feeling that we were going to be all right. And that really struck me. And I think, again, it just speaks to, people always say kids are so resilient. They're so resilient. They can get through these things. And kids are resilient. That is true. Because we don't have enough context to understand that when intense things happen, that they are not normal. We are come to this world very open, like sponges, ready to absorb whatever comes our way. And so when things intense or scary happen, of course, we feel the fear, but we also don't know that it's not normal, so we can adapt to it more quickly. We're less burdened by context. And that can be a good thing in some ways, but sometimes we absorb lessons from those experiences that end up like burying into our psyche and creating patterns and beliefs that are end up being harmful later on. And that was true. I mean, I was 11 years old, so I would say I definitely knew it wasn't normal. I had some context, but also I was still quite adaptable. And that was when I heard that story, I think of that adaptability, that ability to accept what's happening because you aren't as burdened by history and by knowing what is normal, what's not. And again, there could be a deeper question of nothing is normal, whatever. But there was an ability to move forward and be with it. And if I think about how my mom responded to that time, and I've talked to her about this, is she wanted to move forward. She wanted to be strong and keep things stable for us. That was very important to her. She wanted us to continue forward, to focus on the future, to focus on the day-to-day and not get so drowned and wrapped up in 9/11. And, there really was, again, if you could categorize it, there are two kind of buckets to how 9/11 families reacted. And it's not actually a binary. In reality, it was much more nuanced in the day-to-day, but you either kind of put your head down and kind of move past it, or you embraced the public attention and embraced your identity as a 9/11 victim and got involved in the memorials, got involved in all the things that people were doing to commemorate what happened. And there isn't a right or wrong necessarily, but we chose the keep things private path. And that had its advantages and it had its disadvantages. I'm glad that, when the guy in town who worked for 60 Minutes knocked on Mom's door, she didn't say yes. She didn't take that invitation to publicly share our family's experience. But also, I think in her desire and all of our desire to not let this drown us, to move forward, we created less space for us to share our feelings and be emotional and do that work of grief, of public grief to heal. And I don't mean public as in on the news. I mean just with each other and with our family. But it was so destabilizing, and I think that's the thing that I remember most about that time is my reality was one thing on September 10th, and on September 11th, it was a completely different reality. It wasn't just my family. Of course, that was the context that I was looking at the most, but it was my school, it was my town, it was what was on the radio and the news. Everything shifted overnight. The world was different. And it was so surreal to realize that the world worked that way, that things could actually change on a dime. It was terrifying in so many ways to know that as a kid, but also it's the truth. And, I think about people often talk about when they lose someone, when they experience grief, there is this pain that they express when they say, it's so painful seeing the world move on when this person is gone. And for me, it was different. The world did stop. The world stopped for a period of time after September 11th. It did move on, but not as quickly. And it's a very strange thing that so many people cared about what happened. and in some ways shared in our grief, but in other ways they didn't understand at all. They were sad for their own reasons that had nothing to do with us. And that would become a theme, the complications of being a part of an historical public event and what that meant for our grief. And for us, it was, we didn't want to touch that. And so we focused on the present and moving forward. And again, it started to feel like if I wanted to talk about things or be sad, that was like a problem. That meant I wasn't moving forward. Again, this was never talked about like this. This is just people surviving a very, very difficult event and just doing our best to not burden each other and and I was the older sister, and in many ways I wasn't a typical older sister, but I did feel responsible. I wanted to be a good example. I wanted to make my mom's life easier. And, after what happened, you would think I would be afraid of flying or afraid of my mom dying or afraid of terrorism, but I wasn't afraid of any of those things. I was so aware that I had one parent, and I really wanted to, be as strong as my mom was and be that good example and move forward. And in some ways I did. I mean, we could attribute some of this to teacher pity, but my grades never changed. I didn't have any major depression or changes in my behavior. I was sad for a period of time, but I was okay. I was functioning. I had friends. I went to school. Yeah, I was quiet and shy and not the most socially adept, but I always had friends. I was doing well. I had activities that I did. Everything really did go on as normal, and I wanted to be that. But it kind of created this sort of fear of speaking about it. And add on top of that, if you weren't, for my younger people, 9/11 was such a huge deal. It was such a big thing. It felt hard to talk about, especially in that first year. It's you're setting a bomb off if you bring up 9/11, because it's it was so in people. It was so surrounding them. And I didn't want to make things awkward. I didn't want to be a bummer, and people could feel that I didn't want to talk about it. And so we didn't. The only person at school who would talk to me about it is the guidance counselor would pull me out of class sometimes and talk to me and just check in, I guess. And I didn't mind it. I didn't really know what the point of it was, but I didn't mind it. I was happy to talk about how I was feeling when I got the chance. But day to day, I really wanted to move forward and move on and do the best that I could. And, that's what we did as a family. And it was hard. It was complicated. We went to this, went to Vermont for Thanksgiving with my dad's parents, my grandparents, and it was fucking depressing. Christmas was depressing. Someone gave us this ability to go on this trip to this Mohonk Mountain, and the three of us went, and it was the spookiest place ever, and it was depressing. Everything was, we would move on, and it's no one's fault. It was just, it was hard. It was hard. And it, as I said, I just was okay. I was okay day to day. But there were times when it would shine through. The one example that sticks out to me the most is, again, someone gave us the ski trip to Colorado, and we went, the three of us, and it was depressing. I mean, it was nice. I mean, we liked to ski. And at one point, the three of us are going down the mountain, and there's this split in the path, and we're supposed to go left so that we can get to where the bottom of the ski lift where we were staying, near where we were staying, and my brother accidentally goes right, and my mom and I just miss him doing that, and we just see him whiz by, and we realize he's going the wrong way. And so we get to the bottom of the mountain where we end up, and we don't know where he is. He doesn't have a cell phone at the time. We don't know how to communicate with him. And I'm like, and it's like the end of the day, and my mom isn't nervous. She really thinks my brother's going to figure it out and get back. And she goes and gets a drink and sits and is very relaxed. And I'm like so anxious. I'm so anxious. I'm so afraid. I'm like, where is my brother? What's happening? And I look back and I'm like, that was like 6 months later. Like, of course, that missing relative moment brought up a lot for me. But day to day, I wasn't feeling that way. I wasn't anxious or depressed or any of those things. I was, certainly quiet. I was a little protective and defensive about talking about it, but I was okay. But the problem became, again, is as I was focusing on moving forward, it became hard to talk about. It became impossible to talk about. And it got to a point where I couldn't talk about it. I literally couldn't say the words. In high school, I think some of my friends, I never actually told them. They just had to figure out on their own, And I remember once, I was freshman year of this high school. I went to a separate high school. I went to a private high school. And we were in this art class, and, you're just messing around in art class. And some, busybody gal in the class just goes around and asks, I don't know how many of us have divorced parents. Let's go around and ask. And so she went around and asked everyone if their parents were divorced. And she gets to me, and I burst out crying. Like, I literally, I couldn't be like, yeah, my dad's dead, so my parents aren't divorced, I guess. It was like so intense. Like, I couldn't talk about it. And then like my junior year of high school, I went on this trip to Spain. I convinced my mom to send me on this like language immersion trip to Spain. And I'm on the plane, and I'm talking to one of these guys that's on the trip, and we're chatting, and he's like, I think somehow it came up like, what kind of music do you like? And he's like, being very highfalutin. He's like, I don't like, what's popular now. I probably like what your dad liked, like that's the kind of the old stuff is what I like, and he's like, so what did your dad listen to? Or something along those lines he asked me. And I was like, I don't have a dad. Like that's all I could say. And I felt weird about that, but I just I don't know, that's what I said. That's literally what I said. And eventually in college years, I started to begin to be able to talk about it more. And I went into therapy and kind of was finally able to unpack. And I think because I was just holding myself together in a kind of intense way, that once I got out of home and got some perspective, that helped. And I mean, it didn't help because I got horribly depressed in college. And that was for a lot of reasons. It was more nuanced than just about grief, though grief had an element for sure. That I started to be able to talk about it more and more. But it still sometimes felt hard. Sometimes it felt weird. And it was silly because I think part of why I felt so bad talking about it is because how hard it was to talk about at that time, because it felt like such a big deal. But obviously, as more time went on, people cared less and less. They didn't care about 9/11. It wasn't a big deal to bring it up. It wasn't dropping a bomb, but you had the memory of that and how intense it was. And so it felt like you were being depressing if you brought it up. And that brings me to another aspect of this experience that I want to talk about. And this is this tension of being a 9/11 victim or having a personal loss connected to a public tragedy, a public event, a historical event, and the tensions that existed for me in that experience. I can't really explain how surreal it could be at times because 9/11 was constantly talked about in the public sphere. And it was this thing of, I guess I'm connected to that, but also it has nothing to do with me. When people are talking about 9/11, they don't think of me or care about me. They're talking about something else. They're using 9/11 to talk about something else or to talk about their own experience. Or it was very strange. And, I can't think of like the number of times, you just be on the news and there would just be that image of the towers burning because in reference to something people were saying. And it was just like this constant ubiquitous thing. And you were always kind of being reminded of it, but none of it had anything to do with me. And it was this strange feeling. I remember in 6th grade, we had a social studies class on world religions. And you had to choose like one religion to do some kind of report on. And it was, the 3 choices were Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And no one wanted to choose Islam. And because of the Islamophobia that was kind of in the environment at that time. And I remember not being on board with that. I think I remember choosing to study Islam because I knew, even then, I knew that there was something off about the way people were talking about these things. That they were using what happened to me to justify all sorts of things that made no sense. And again, I was 11, so I'm not going to say like I had like a philosophy about it. It was just instinctual. It was just kind of like what I felt. And I didn't like the connections people were making. And then when the war in Iraq started, like people were into it publicly. Like I do remember that. And at first I didn't know enough to know. But as time went on, I got more and more upset because they never would have been able to do that if it wasn't for 9/11. And they used what happened to me to inflict violence elsewhere. And I think about like maybe 3,000 people died on 9/11. I don't know the exact numbers, but hundreds of thousands of people died in the war on terror, and many of them civilians in drone strikes and all sorts of attacks. And I can imagine a lot of those experiences must have been pretty terrorizing for the people that experienced them. And for me, there is this question of justice. What is justice? And I don't know what justice is. I've hardly ever experienced it. But I do know that mostly when people are talking about justice, they're talking about the continuation of violence. And I don't really agree with that. I don't think it solves anything. I want no one to have experienced what we experienced. I wouldn't pay any price for it. And maybe some people would say that's naive, but I look at what the U.S. did in the Middle East, and I don't see a safer world. I'm not looking around and seeing a safer world. So I think other strategies make more sense. And now we're at war again, and I'm like, why aren't we learning? Why are we not getting it? But it bothered me. It bothered me to be connected to that. And I always wanted to speak publicly about it, but it felt like no one actually cares. No one cares. Just because I'm a 9/11 victim, no one gives a shit what I think about this stuff. And I was very shy. I was very uncomfortable being public and saying what I thought. The other big moment was Osama bin Laden's death, which happened while I was in college at Georgetown, I think my junior year. It was around finals time. And, kids were just being kids, and they just used it as an excuse to let off steam, and they all ran to the Capitol and just like danced around because Osama bin Laden was killed. And that pissed me the fuck off, I'll tell you. I was so angry. I was so angry because it bothered me. It bothered me that this was the victory. This is what was going to make up for what happened. That, and again, it was never about me. And I had over and over again, I had to be reminded that it was not about me, even though it was connected. Killing Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with us. It was just about whatever the government wanted to do. But I hated the idea that people felt okay celebrating that because of what happened to us. And, for me, I just think about all the lives that were grinded up and lost in this horrible war. All of our soldiers who had PTSD and were harmed. I mean, as well as all the civilians that led to this win, apparently. And another time, I guess it was after my freshman or sophomore year of high school, I convinced my mom to sign me up for this model congress thing. It was like a 2-week program, summer program in DC that they said would be good for college applications, which I was delusional to think that would actually help. Like a 2-week model congress would do anything to get me into a good college. That was a delusional thought, but that's how I thought back then. And I convinced my mom to sign me up for this program. And so I went, and it was, fine. We did do a mock congress, and they assign you a party, and then you get assigned to a committee, and then you make laws or something or whatever. Anyway, it was very, very fine, very bland experience. But at one point they did a debate, and the issue of Guantanamo came up, and there were just all these bombastic kids, mostly boys, talking about how the terrorists deserve what they get, and getting all these cheers. And I remember sitting in my seat white knuckled angry because how dare they? I didn't think torturing people was something to celebrate, in my opinion. And again, I wanted, I believed in people being treated humanely. I was against what they were doing over there. And I knew I could just run down there and just drop the 9/11 bomb and shut them all up. But I knew I couldn't do that. And I really wasn't bold enough to do it. But I still have the visceral memory of how angry I was in that moment, how much I wanted to say something, because I just didn't agree. But again, this was this thing, this surrealness. But as I say, I was humbled constantly in the fact that, yes, I am personally affected by 9/11, but none of it had anything to do with me. It didn't have anything to do with me. And I had to reconcile that. And the other thing that was strange about being connected to this event was, again, I was pretty lucky that I didn't have a ton of this, but I would have these experiences of this outsized sympathy that I would receive from people that felt very jarring and strange and weird. And again, none of these people who did this to me were bad intended. They had wonderful intentions. They couldn't help it. And I think if the situation had been reversed, I probably would have done the same thing. But so in high school, I really didn't talk about being a 9/11 victim. There was a boy in my grade whose dad died on 9/11. I never spoke to him about it once. Not once. Never even thought to mention it to him. But I had an English class that I wasn't doing so well in. And I really cared about that at that time. And she had this assignment that was a personal essay. You could write about whatever you wanted. And I decided to write about 9/11. Partially, I did think it would be healing for me at that time. But if I'm being truly honest, I wanted an A, and I knew that would get me there. And so I sincerely wrote the essay. I wrote it very sincerely. I wanted to express things. I shared it with my mom. It was very, I went in as genuine as possible. And of course I got that A. Of course I did. I've read back the essay many times, and it was horrible. And it was so badly written. It was just not good at all. And the teacher was easier on me after that. And this was in high school, so it was a couple years later. This was, I don't know. I was in high school from 2004 to 2008, so within those years. And again, I hated that. I hated that she was a lot nicer to me afterwards. And I guess she had told a couple teachers. So, in my Spanish class, my Spanish teacher pulls me aside, and she says to me, she's like, and I was wondering, why would she pull me aside? What's going on? And she says to me, she's like, I just wanted to talk to you because we're having an assignment come up that might be sensitive for you. And she's like, we're going to do an assignment on the Day of the Dead. And I know that your dad died on September 11th. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's happening so you can feel comfortable. And I just was like, lady, enough. I was like, really? What? Everyone knows someone who's died. I was a bit jaded at that time, and then maybe there were kids in my class who hadn't experienced major loss, but they knew what death was. And I was just kind of like, okay, thanks, appreciate it. That's great. I obviously was very polite to her face, and she had good intentions. That was a very sweet thing to do, but it's the 9/11 that made her do it, in my opinion. And that would be sometimes the things I would encounter when I would talk about it, which made it harder to talk about. And again, I don't blame people. It's just like they shared in this experience with us. They had a different experience if they didn't personally lose someone, but it was a shared experience. They get it. They get to own it. They get to feel it. It gets to mean something to them. It doesn't get to be just ours. And that is that weird dichotomy. And it always made me angry. It's so funny talking about this now because I wouldn't describe myself as an angry person, but there's so much anger that was in me and in this story that I'm just noticing now. And the other thing that was strange about it was the memorial and the museum. You know, these were things that were created with good intentions. And I think they did consult some victims. They must have. I don't know, but we definitely didn't participate in that. And so this was this thing that was created, you know, for us or not for us. I wasn't sure what it was all for. To commemorate. I remember when the memorial was finished, not the museum, but the memorial with the fountains. We all went as a family. And, you know, my mom did not like to go to 9/11 events, but we went to this and, you know, we kind of had this grim, let's get through this attitude. And I remember, like, as I said, the memorial was finished, but the museum wasn't. So there was construction everywhere. We had to walk like a million miles through all this like construction zone, whatever bullshit to finally get to, you know, the area where there's the two fountains and like the names all around. And we go and we finally find my dad's name and it's there engraved. And then it's this dark kind of pit and the water's running down if you haven't been there. So it's like water running down into this dark square like fountain. And I remember sitting there looking at it. I can't explain it. It depressed me so much. And I had this impulse you get. Like I just wanted to jump. Like that's what it made me feel. Was like this desire to jump. You know, I was like, this is fucking dark. This feels dark. And again, that wasn't the intention. That wasn't the purpose. And I've been to that area many times since and seen people, you know, taking pictures and being tourists and having a time. And I've gone many times. And, you know, my opinion about it has changed. But it's surreal. It's just like, what is happening? What is this? Who is this for? How am I supposed to feel about this? And I didn't really know. It upset me. It disturbed me. And then years later, when the museum was finished, I went. I tried to convince my brother to go with me, and he wouldn't. He agreed to have lunch with me before I went, but that was it. And so I go, and this is like, you know, I would say 2016, maybe. I went to the museum. And it's the one place in the world where I am a VIP. 9/11 victims get to go in for free, and they have a special line that they pay someone to sit there and wait for a 9/11 victim to come or something crazy like that. I am exaggerating a bit for effect, but there was like a VIP aspect to it. I go in for free. I go inside, and I just see all these people there, like tourists walking around, and it wasn't like badly done or anything. It's just like, I just didn't know how to feel about it. Like there's my dad's picture and people are just like walking around. And then I think about myself, like on my 8th grade trip to DC, like passing the Vietnam War Memorial and us laughing and joking about like what people did at the dance last night, rather than recognizing that those were real people who really died. It's again, like I'm not judging them, but I'm also like, this isn't about me again. Like, why am I here? Even though my dad's face is in this room on a wall. Like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to feel. And there's this special room in the back that's only for victims, and you can go there. And they weren't able to identify all the remains that they found. You know, some of it was just unidentifiable. According to my mom, they did identify something from my father, like a bone of some kind that I guess was buried. I didn't know about that till years later. But anyway, you can go into this room. It's like there's like this like cozy chair and like a tissue, and it's like a, you know, it's kind of like a bland office type room. And then there's this window. And in the window, in my memory, you can see these like filing cabinets. And I guess the filing cabinets are full of the remains they couldn't identify. And like, I remember sitting there and being like, what the hell? Like, why is this here? Like, I just wanted to like break the wall down and like take all the remains and give them a real ceremony. Why are they trapped under this museum? And I'm sure there's legalities to that and all sorts of things and reasons and whatever. But I was pissed. Again, pissed. And I wasn't like upset in any one particular. It was so absurd. It was absurd for me to be looking at these filing cabinets, being expected to feel something. And I left being like, I don't have any desire to go again, but I don't know. You know, it isn't about me. It isn't about me. And that's just the reality of it. But there are other aspects of 9/11, you know, that is important to name. Because it's not just these strange, weird experiences. The publicness of 9/11 meant that we could benefit in certain ways from that attention. And the main way that we benefited was the Victims' Compensation Fund. So in order to prevent us from suing the airlines for what happened, the government created the Victims' Compensation Fund, and they paid folks out based on their loss. There was some element of calculation based on the salary the person made, though they did try to not make the differences so stark, I think. But that in itself is crazy when you think about that, you know, deciding the value of a human life. And of course, in capitalism, it's based on what their salary was. And so my mom received a sum, and she invested portions of it and gave those portions to me and my brother as a trust when we were 26. And that is not money I deserved or earned, but it is money that I have. And it is very complicated for me to reconcile it because, again, horrible things happen to people all the time and they don't get money for it. People experience all kinds of terror in their daily lives. They experience sudden, horrible losses that could have been prevented, and they don't get money. And it doesn't feel good. It feels wrong. But it also, I can't change the way the world works on my own. I have intentionally given away portions through my work with resource generation, but I'm not going to act like I'm a saint about it. It paid for my grad school. And my dad's company created a fund to pay for my college education. So I didn't pay a penny for going to Georgetown. And every semester, I just had to send an email to them, you know, on my hands and knees in gratitude for their support and just sending them the bill, and they paid it. It was an incredibly generous thing to do, especially because my dad worked there all of one day. And that is the complicated aspect of it too. Like, yes, I had to deal with the surrealness of it and the strangeness of it and the people using it and having their own opinions, but It was a financial windfall, and there's no other way to describe it. And it's been hard for me to reconcile it and to understand it and to take ownership of it. And truthfully, I don't have an amazing relationship with money. It is not great, but I'm working on it, and I'm trying to really be centered in what I can do, and not letting this money change me in ways for the worse. Am I succeeding all the time? I have no idea. Anyway, I want to move to the last kind of portion of this episode where I want to share some of the lessons I feel I have learned from this experience and how it has shaped my perspective on life and how it shaped my worldview. And I think there are two main things that I want to convey. And the first one is that reality isn't stable, that change is the constant in life. As Octavia Butler says in Parable of the Sower, God is change. And as we talk about in Buddhism, the truth of impermanence, that nothing stays the same. And I think having my reality shift from one day to another in a very visceral, real way as a child, that stays deep in my psyche. It's very imprinted in me. This shift of reality, this shift of timelines, as they say in certain spiritual circles. I had one thing one day and the next day was something completely different. That stays within me, and there is something within me that knows deep in my bones that nothing stays and is very open-handed to what may come. Again, there are exceptions to this, but for me, what I believe and what I know to be true is that we can, society may tell us there are certain things we can do to have a stable life, that we can, if we follow these rules, if we do these things, then we're going to have enough money to live, or we're going to have a good life. But I've always kind of felt the lie in that. My father followed every rule of society. He got a good job. He did all the right things, and he just died out of nowhere. I mean, so there was a part of me that could never fully play the part, never fully pursue what other people said was stable when it didn't align with what I wanted to do. And, because of that, I have taken certain risks in life that other people wouldn't take. I have pursued things that other people wouldn't pursue because it was in alignment with what I wanted to do in my life. And I think, I know deeply that life is short. And so you might as well do what you want to do within reason, of course. I mean, don't harm other people, but there isn't there isn't a lot of value in living for other people's opinions of you. There's nuance in that, but I'm not going to get into it. At least from my perspective in my life, that's what I felt. And I want to be clear, just because things are always changing, just because there isn't stability, just because we have to surrender so much and adapt so much to what happens in our lives, that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to pursue our desires, to create new things. It is valuable. If you have a desire in your heart to, create a business, or a desire in your heart to nurture your relationship so that it will stay around forever, those aren't bad desires. It's just keeping your hand open to what may happen. Again, it's what they talk about in Buddhism, non-clinging, not having attachment to outcomes and attachment to what happens. But yes, we can create a different world. It's not about we're at mercy to all these circumstances. In a way we are, because we're not in control of so much, but we are not at mercy. We get to create, we get to pursue things. It's just the issue of attachment and the issue of being rigid. We can't be rigid in life, as that's what I've felt and learned. This is my perspective. I'm speaking from my perspective. There are other perspectives, but that's what this experience has taught me. And yes, a lot of the risks I've taken in my life and the ways I've lived my life have a lot to do with the privileges I have. I mean, that's undeniable. at the same time, there's something beyond that in me that just can't conform in a certain way. Like, has to eventually do what I want to do, has to eventually do what feels right to me. And I think that just comes from this like deep knowing that it's all changing anyway. It's all unstable. It's all, I want to say chaos, which is the wrong word to say, but that is what's coming to mind at the moment. So I might as well. And, the other thing that I think it really instilled in me is like the truth of this human experience. And again, I'm not always integrating this every day, but like what they talk about in Buddhism is like old age, sickness, and death. Like no one escapes those things. You encounter them. Even if you're unlucky enough not to experience old age, you see it in other people. This is the nature of our reality. And though, billionaires are trying to live forever, that isn't the truth of things. And so this is the limitations of our existence as humans on this earth, and trying as best as I can not to turn away from that. Although I admit I don't like the idea of death. I don't like thinking about my death. But I know that it's real. And I know that it could happen when I least expect it. And so as much as I can, which again, I could do better at this, just admitting and being attuned to the truth of that. And the fact that every moment we have here, no matter how painful and hard and horrible, which it can be, it is a gift. I mean, this experience is very profound, to be alive, to be here, to feel the sunlight on your face. It is a profound gift, and it wouldn't be a gift if it lasted forever. The temporariness of our time, I think, does give it a sense of meaning. And the other thing I want to talk about, there's another lesson and perspective that I've gained. And I think the thing that I want to, thing that I feel like I've integrated from this experience is that this question of deservingness. And I think that for me and the way I view the world, I don't think I deserve anything, good or bad. I don't deserve anything good or bad. And that viewing the world through the lens of deservingness, I think can, in my perspective, in my experience, leads me down unhealthy pathways that create more suffering in my life. What do I mean by that? I have really struggled with this money that I got from September 11th and this like extra pity that I would sometimes get because I felt like I didn't deserve it. People experience tragedies all the time. Like, why am I getting special treatment? I don't deserve it. And the reality is I don't. It's something that happened. It's something that exists. I don't deserve it. And just like people who bad things happen to, who experience loss and suffering of all kinds, they don't deserve it either. And, there is this thing that happens within us when we see someone suffering. We want to do an analysis. We want to figure out, what did they do wrong so I don't experience that thing? And again, sometimes that is a useful exercise, but a lot of the time that's about us trying to push away the reality that their misfortune could happen to us. That's what we're pushing away because we know it could. Maybe it couldn't easily happen to us. I mean, I think the best and clearest example is the way that people are so uncomfortable around the unhoused and how they want to hide them away and not see them because they don't want to face the reality of what's happening, but they also don't want to look that person in the eyes and realize that a couple of choices, a couple of misfortunes, that could be them because they don't deserve what happened to them. And I think the more important aspect of this, I'm not going to try to prove to you because I'm sure you could argue that some people deserve some things and some people don't. I'm not going to engage in that. But I would say that I want to emphasize what having this worldview has done for me is, when I don't think anyone deserves anything, when I see someone suffering, it just leaves the lane open for me to feel compassion. And I think that's what the world needs more. And again, when I feel compassion for someone, that doesn't mean I have to necessarily do something to alleviate their situation. Sometimes I do, but I really tune into myself and I feel in and I'm like, oh, is there something for me to do here? And if there is, I do it. And if there's not, I send love. And then at the same token, when we talk about deserving good things, the reality is, like, I mean, if we think about all like the billionaires, they have lots of money, lots of power, lots of things that people would want. They don't deserve it. They just have it. There's nothing special about them. And we all know that. But I think that when someone has something wonderful happen in their lives, you can just celebrate that or be happy for them or not even let it affect you. You know, it like when we look at someone and they have something wonderful happen and we think, oh, they don't deserve that. They don't deserve that good thing. I want to tear them down. How does that serve us? How does that make our lives better? We could think that, but I think the better question is, how do I create a world where more people can get their needs met and be celebrated in these ways? And all, you know what I mean? Like, how can I take action to create the world I want to see, not how can I cast judgment or tear someone down for what they have. Again, there are arguments to be made. There are exceptions to every rule. But I think those are the two things that I've really taken away from this experience. Like the strangeness and surrealness of the 9/11 victim status has really just kind of helped me see that this question of deservingness is not a useful framework for life. It doesn't bring happiness and it creates confusion. Again, me like feeling bad about myself because I didn't deserve the attention or the money or the support. I mean, I don't think that helped anyone else. Me being self-obsessed and self-hating and uncomfortable, that didn't change anyone's scenario. That didn't make the world better. And it didn't make my life better. It's something that exists, and then I have to take responsibility for it. I have to take responsibility for this status. I have to take responsibility for this experience and push and take actions towards the world I want to see. And that's kind of the two things that I feel like I most want to express about what I've learned from these experiences. And there's many more, but those are like the two takeaways that feel most potent now. But yeah, I want to thank you for listening this far. It's kind of crazy that I have talked for this long, but I hope it was useful in some way. And I really appreciate anyone who listens to this. But I think the thing I feel most in this moment is that this episode was 100% for me. This was something that I wanted to express in myself. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Anyway, I hope that you are doing well, and I just want to thank you for listening. All right, bye.